I know as a to start requiring papers by hand.
Ooh.
Yep.
All right.
Well, you would be able to read any of my quizzes. Verbal presentation.
Yeah.
I have 7:17, so I will call us back to order for the business portion of our meeting. We'll take these in order. We have agenda consideration first. If everybody had a chance to look over it, I would take a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
I will make a motion, we accept the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Motion is second, is there discussion? And then we'll move to a vote. Do we have Richard back?
Yes.
Yes,
Thanks. I'll take that as an affirmative, Richard.
yeah, thank you.
Bill? Aye. Crystal?
Aye.
Christie?
Aye.
Heidi?
Aye.
Ricardo? Aye. And chair votes for, so we are as presented. I did not clarify with Diane, I did not see any public comments come through for me. Is that accurate yet, Diane?
That is correct. No public comments.
Awesome, thank you. So we will move on to board communication. It is with some sadness that Jillian Daly is leaving us. She's been our communications director. She's done a great job. She has been multiple places and really done a stellar job in not just communicating, but educating our parents and interfacing them with the apps that we use and you know, sort of going above and beyond on so many things. So we are going to miss her. She has agreed to help us with the transition until we have that role replaced. But I would just like to call her out and thank her for all the work that she's done on behalf of North Marion and the level of communications she's brought us up to, which we were not at before. So I thank you, Jillian, and much appreciated. We have our two ASB representatives from the high school, Kenley and Caden, is that right?
It is, yeah.
All righty.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Kelly Dubava, the ASB Vice President. I'm Katie Russell, I'm the Service Coordinator. And we're going to be giving you an update about the different happenings at the clubs, for the clubs and activities at the high school. Starting with ASB, during the month of November, we worked to raise $656 during Holiday Hope Month, which is when we fundraised for Mr. Polias, our family outreach coordinator, to help provide food and gifts to our families in our holiday, to families in our school district during the holidays this season. Our highlight was our first ever middle school staff versus high school staff basketball game. We raised $298 for the cause. Currently, we're in the works of planning the student of the term assembly for Friday, and along with our winter formal that will be taking place in February.
And next up is our Key Club, and they did a cemetery cleaning early in November. And I've also been collecting funds for Mr. Price outreach program by selling turkey grams at lunches. They're also going to be selling candy grams for a club fundraiser and are volunteering with Love Santa this Friday.
For FBLA in this past month, they had an opportunity to go tour Portland State University. Members were able to get a tour of the campus and learn more about PSU's MBA program. Thanks to the coordination of Mr. Bill Groff. Yeah. As of now, they're currently getting members signed up for regionals in January, volunteering at the Jubilee Food Pantry next week, and preparing fun activities for Big Brother, Big Sister.
Our Mecca Club is currently selling raffle tickets for a chance to win an iPad. Tickets are available for $5 or 3 for $10. And you can purchase a ticket during both lunches, or you can contact Ms. Terrell in the Media Center. The raffle will be held during Friday during advisory, and they're also going to be selling light up necklaces for a nice little Christmas spirit touch during lunches for $2. And Mecca dancers have also been very hard at work these past couple of weeks. Their instructor, Mr. Oh, I'm butcher that so bad. Mr. Vestuvi, hopefully. I'm so sorry.
Okay. For FFA in November, they had their monthly meeting during advisory. And then they had some other fun activities the few nights following, which include turkey bowling, pie eating contest, and donut eating on a string contest. This Wednesday, FFA is taking an activity trip to the Oregon Zoo to look at the zoo lights, which that'll be fun.
And our drama club, they had their last performance, of the musical Working on Saturday. They were very good audiences, lots of laughter, lots of applause, and overall very good turnout. On Tuesday, they'll be doing recovery cleanup from the show and then having their annual White Elephant Party. Next up, they're going to be working on auditions for the first week of January for a spring show. And thank you to everyone who has supported their return to live theater.
For yearbook, they're working on finishing up their front cover, and the students are also getting the winter yearbook pages ready.
Our National Art Honor Society is working on a new design for Donald mural, and they're continuing to create a recess shed for the primary school with the carpentry class.
For Awesome, which is Operation Student Safety on the Move, they're continuing the focus on mental health during this time.
Our prom committee is planning the prom, which will be taking place on April 22nd from 8 to 11 p.m. and location is secure. The theme currently is being decided on, and their next meeting will be this Thursday morning.
For robotics, they're currently working to raise money for their clubs to go on tournaments and competitions, which they have been doing by selling concessions at the basketball games. They hosted a tournament at North Marion in November and recently attended another competition in December in West Salem.
And finally, our National Honor Society recently had a blood drive, and they collected over 50 pints of blood on November 30th. They're going to be hosting another one in May.
Do you all have any questions for us?
You guys did such a good job.
Sounds awesome.
Thank you.
I like it. Gotta love it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to 5C, for the student education updates. I don't have anything, very busy with other stuff. I don't know if you have any comments you want to add, Bill. From the OSB level?
So I think I already told you all that January 1st, I'll be the treasurer for OSBA state thing. Legislative stuff is being compiled because the LC has dropped all their pre-drafts. So even though I'm on the side going through it's thousands of prelim bill writing going on. I attended with OSBA the Oregon Business Leadership Summit this morning up in Portland. Tina Koschek was the guest speaker, laying out her major goals for the first part of her term, as well as Wyden. I can't remember his other name. The other guy, Merkle. So just so you know, as I was at CUBE in Miami, which is the Council of Urban Boards of Education. It's basically the biggest equity conference in education. And I used to, this is my fourth time attending it. Anyhow, it's awesome. It's even in my professional world, this is the best conference I attend every year. It's outstanding. And the flight home got delayed by weather in California, so I didn't get home till 2 a.m. last night. And I was at the Leadership Summit at 8 a.m. in Portland this morning. So that's why I'm kind of stuttering through words here. So just but yeah, the Leadership Summit, and then some of the new leadership team, the new House Speaker was there and went through his priorities for the legislative session. And of course, homelessness is right up there, but education was touted numerous times. And for someone who's been in the semiconductor career pathway for 43 years, I've never heard the word semiconductor mentioned so many times per minute, per hour, as in the 4 hours I was there this morning. The semiconductor bill is all everybody in politics in Oregon is talking about, and how to get that back and bring it back to Gresham, bring it back to Corvallis, and things like that. And so the HP, the woman who leads the Corvallis Semiconductor, so that is their job pathway for technology, that robotics and everything else that semiconductors feed is where all the politicians are focusing their efforts. There's other things too, but homelessness is still the top issue and how to address that. And there was quite a bit of talk about that. Capacis, out of Woodburn. Their leader gave the most inspirational talk of the morning. So back to OSBA, legislative advocacy is starting, right after the holidays. And so that'll consume a lot of time. And revamping the OSBA budget will consume most of my time on the side for that. I'll stop there.
Did they find up the candidate for position 11?
It's open, don't know yet.
Okay.
I do know my friend Anthony is not going to apply. So that much I had confirmed this morning, so, for sure.
All righty, thank you, Bill, much appreciated. Moving on to 5D, our UNME leadership team. And I think they're joining us.
Here she is.
Yes, I am. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Happy what Monday. It's only Monday. Happy Monday. Yeah. So it's Jana again. Are you able to share, Linda, or would you like me to? Great.
It's on the screen.
Oh.
So what?
I don't mind.
There it is.
There it is.
There it is.
Great. Yes. Okay. So here is our report for December. Of course, this is our team. And then this is me, Jana Giles, again, third grade teacher. So I want to start off by just showing appreciation. We want to thank our administrative team this year. They've been extremely helpful, same with classified, and the school board for all of your support and hard work. For this year, it's been a crazy year again. And so thank you for stepping up and being there for us teachers. We really appreciate it. And then I wanted to share our goals for this year. We have two really big ones. The first one is that we really want to show our members that we appreciate them as a union. And so we're going to start doing monthly appreciation gifts. We started this month with, we want to warm the hands of those that warm our students' hearts. And so we gave gloves and hand warmers out. And then next month will be all about self-care. So we're just prioritizing giving back to our members for all their amazing work they do for our students. And then our second goal is to create a stronger connection and streamline communication with the school board, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. We want to create the best learning environment for our students. And one of the best ways to do that is open communication. So I'm, again, very appreciative to be here and thank you guys for letting me. And then our areas that we still need some support with and more communication about, again, the substitute and staffing shortages. I just saw we hired or it's on the list to come up, a half-time math teacher, so that's good. And I know that stuff is moving forward. Again, we just want to make sure we're doing what we can to help provide the substituting and staffing, help have conversations around it, especially because a lot of teachers are still providing class coverage, which is hard. And then safety plans and procedures being updated with changes. I think there are some changes and I don't know what they are, what the procedures are right now. And I can say that our new teachers have not been communicated what our safety plans are. Like, for example, our new teachers have not been trained in a lockdown, at least not all of them. So that's something I know should be a priority and that they would like to be a priority. And then still COVID concerns not being addressed. COVID's not, I mean, it's happening. It's definitely happening. I know now it's the flu and like RSV and other stuff going on. But there's still not a lot of communication around what is getting covered and what is not with COVID. And then the last thing is just communication, especially now that Jillian's leaving us. We want to make sure that we still have that constant communication with the district. And then again, oh yeah, please come to our classrooms. Please come to our classrooms. We'd love to see you guys in there. Your executive board's willing to have you come and observe. Please come in anytime. It's really fun right now because it's like everything's holiday themed. And then we also have our third grade music performance on Thursday. So please come to that. Yeah, and then here's my information. So do you have any questions for me or comments?
Anybody else? Hey, thank you, Jana. Much appreciated you being here with us. And yeah, we appreciate you checking in with us. So
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
all right, take care.
Yeah, and happy holidays, everyone.
You.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we have an extended overnight field trip to acknowledge. Actually several. High school wrestling, Coach Classic Tournament is gonna be in North Bend on December 9th and 10th, so that would have already happened. And then high school boys basketball tournament in Astoria on December 27th through the 29th, as well as girls tournament in Astoria on the 27th through the 29th. So those are upcoming. How did they do with wrestling?
I wasn't able to talk to Mr. Shepherd today. He was a little busy. He's really happy with the teams.
Yeah.
Good,
The
good.
10 girls that are out and the boys that are in it. He sees good results.
Huge strides and improvement.
Yeah, really, it has.
Mhm.
Our first home wrestling is tomorrow, Wednesday.
Yes.
Nice. Alrighty, moving on our agenda to number 6, consent agenda. If you guys have had a chance to take a look at that, I would entertain a motion.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm just curious, Jesse Vaughn, it says that extra duty is listed as band director, but that's his teaching job, correct? It's for band performances. Oh, okay, concerts and so after hours. Yeah, the showcases and competitions. Okay. Thanks, I'm just curious about it. And it's a sheet. Do you have a zero period jazz band this year? I'll move to accept the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
The motion is second. Is there discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. Bill? Aye. Richard?
Aye.
Crystal?
Aye.
Christie?
Aye.
Heidi?
Aye.
Ricardo?
Aye.
And chair votes for. Item number 7, budget and business appropriations. Do you have much you want to share with us, Linda?
Hold on. Sorry. Couldn't get my unmute button to unmute.
That's all right.
I just wanted to say that our taxes are coming in almost exactly like I predicted, which is unheard of. So we'll see in December. But I mean, I was within, for over $1 million, I was within like 1,000. I was like, what? So that's kind of cool.
None of us are not surprised. Good.
But other than that, there's nothing big happening at the moment. I'll have more to talk about probably in January, once I see where things settle for our enrollment through December 31st. We'll go from there. It is trending down a little bit, and it always does this time of year. So we'll see how it ends for the last day of December.
All righty, anybody have any questions for Linda? Thank you, Linda, much appreciated.
Yep.
Moving on to number 8, school operations and principals report. And we have Desiree with a nice presentation.
All right.
I first have to apologize. I came dressed to be in a kindergarten classroom because that's been kind of our life at the CO, is helping serve lunches, do recess duty. Linda was out with first grade recess today, helping out where possible. And I left my clothes in my car before my son stole my car to go to work. So I am dressed for a kindergarten classroom right now. Thank you. I appreciate it. They're definitely comfortable shoes compared to what I would normally wear. So what was that? And like 6 layers of masks because there's so much coughing and fluids happening. So I'm here to talk to you today about our school report cards, which were actually released earlier in the fall. We were waiting to present them, hoping for some changes. We were told by ODE that there were some potential changes with the data, and now things have been finalized. And so we're going to kind of talk about what we found out in the report cards this year, as well as kind of where we're going with the information that we received. So first off, in your board packet, you have a copy of all the at a glance for the schools, as well as the profile reports for each of the schools and the district. And they were posted to our website today. We're not going to review all the documents that are included in the board packet because it's a lot. But what I do want to do is take a few minutes to talk to you about how to read those documents so you know what you're looking at. And then we're going to focus on a few key data points from them and really understand how we can start using data to inform our practices. And then if there are questions that you have about the data once you have reviewed it, you can let Diane know or myself, and we can prepare an additional report to bring to the board at another time. So the first one that we want to go to, and Linda, can you just go to like slideshow mode? It's a little easier to see that way. Up at the top button. There you go, that works. Up towards the top where it's next to share, where it says the play button with a, there you go, perfect. All right. So the first section that you'll see on all the at a glances is this first bar, which talks about the students that we serve. And it talks about the students' total enrollment that we have, as well as kind of our ethnic breakup of the different students we serve, as well as the different 5 critical groups that we serve. So our ever English language learners, the numbers of languages spoken, our students experiencing disabilities, whether or not we met our threshold for vaccinations that are required, and how many students are currently identified as free and reduced lunch. One thing that the state has kind of pointed out in all the reports this year is that our free and reduced lunch numbers are going to be kind of skewed or higher or not accurate, because last year we just gave lunches to everybody. And so because of that, a lot of people didn't reapply. So sometimes those numbers are going to be way lower. Sometimes just the impacts of the pandemic, people applying for it was higher, and they might not still be having applied for it this year. So the state cautions us around those numbers. They're not going to be accurate for a little bit. The next page that you're going to see talks about our, oh yeah, go for it.
Do you want us to ask questions as we go? Are you sure?
You yeah. And if I yeah, absolutely. I think it makes sense to ask questions as you go, and then I will make sure if I don't have a good answer immediately that we like have somebody write it down.
I promise I mean well.
Yeah, I totally understand.
So when we look at the demographics here, can you just remind me how the state gets those numbers? Like how we're giving the state the data we have.
Yes.
How is someone deciding if the student is in which demographic?
That is you. That's a great
How do we-
question. It's usually self-reporting when they register.
And so, okay,
Then they
Yeah.
pull that data.
okay,
So that's all things that are in our Power School system.
okay, okay, so, okay. And then when the state uses reports, outcomes based on like financial status, or I can't remember exactly what the term is.
Economic disadvantage.
Economic disadvantage, is that coming from the free and reduced lunch? So for the last 2 years, that's
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I would say the other part of that statistic that's something we're always aware of is those numbers change as the student gets older. So for example, we'll see a higher population of students identify as needing free and reduced lunch at the elementary levels, and we see that number drop off at high school. Why? It could be, you know, whether or not I wanted to eat lunch to begin with. I'm going to eat with my friends. I don't want to necessarily get free lunch. I'm not going to apply. I'm going to convince my mom not to fill out the paperwork. So we'll see that number dip down, even though we know, like statistically, we could even have within families, you know, where we would think it would be higher.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
See, that was easy.
Easy, I gotcha. Just as another disclaimer though, the little graphics are from the state. They are not representing any of our schools. They're just the free graphics the state gives me for this presentation. So we'll get into ours a little bit later. So this next section is about who our staff are. It includes how many full-time teachers, educational assistants, counselors, psychologists are in our school, as well as our retention rate. So how many teachers we have that have been with us for over 3 years, our retention rate of our principal, as well as our experience. So the percentage of licensed teachers with more than 3 years experience. So that's another measure that we have. And then our next section, so these are when it starts to change just slightly depending on the school age. The school environment we'll see in each of our school levels. The first is around class size. So what's our average class size? And then our percentage of regular attenders, which goes towards our chronic absentees. So regular attenders are students who are not chronically absent. It's the positive side of the other side of that number, percentage of students who are chronically absent. Okay. Next, after school environment, for the elementary and middle school, we have them talk about our academic progress. And so for this year, you'll see a blank on that. With our primary school, because of how we have split up our primary school, this will always be blank for us because we don't do testing till the 3rd grade. So we'll never have test scores that would be included in this for the primary school, but we would have it at our intermediate school. This year, they won't be showing those growth pieces because we don't have 2 years of good data to measure because of the times where during the pandemic where they cut testing off and then the number of students opting out, et cetera. For the high school, this section specifically talks about our on track to graduate, which is our 9th grade on track numbers. And that is the percentage of students who have earned at least a quarter of their credits by the time they end their freshman year. And so all of these numbers, we're going to see both North Marion's numbers as well as what the Oregon State average is. Next one. Then we start to get to the actual score, the raw scores compared to the state. So for elementary and middle, we're going to see our English language arts, our mathematics, and our science. Just a reminder, English language arts and mathematics is done 3rd, 4th, 5th at the elementary level. Science is only done at the 5th grade level. And then next for high school, we're going to have because we only test at the 11th grade level, we're going to have statistics on our on-time graduation, our 5th year completers, and students who have enrolled in college within the first 16 months after graduating. And so we're going to have our statistics around that. Then when you have the report card, you flip it over and on the back, you have all this good data. And this is really where we start to get our statistics around our OSAT scores and then broken down by our different demographic groups. And so you're going to see it disaggregated that way. If it says like there's no data, it's because there's so few students in that group that they're not going to give us the percentage because it would be obvious who that percentage is. So if, for example, we don't have more than 10 students within our Asian population within a school, then it wouldn't give us that data. And then for the high school, same thing, we're going to have our regular attenders, our English language arts, and our mathematics that they'll give us our disaggregated data around.
But they will never say 0. Like,
Yeah, they will never say that. So we won't know if it's that we have no kids or if it's that we have fewer than 10. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So like the ones that are like free and reduced price lunch, are those counted in other areas too? So it's not like 100%, it's just like for each of those areas that apply? Because I'm looking like, am I on the right page? Yeah.
like if you were free and reduced
And Latino or free and reduced and white or free and reduced.
and white and with disability
So that-
and a female.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, so they're never going to give us that like integrated disaggregated data, like what does it look like to be that kind of cross-sectionality of intersectionality. We can pull that information and kind of say, well, what does that look like for us? And I think actually like a future report on that could be really telling, like what is it, you know, what is the experience that our Latinx students who have disabilities and are maybe also English language learners. What are they experiencing and how does that data look like compared to the all student group?
Right.
So those are absolutely data points that we can pull out, but the state isn't going to specifically call it out in a different way. All right, so next, and this piece is not in your board packet. I added this slide today because it is the one piece I thought I want to explain this one a little bit. It's a kind of an interesting piece. This is in the profile sheets. You want me to turn this?
Is that okay?
Yeah, I almost like printed it off for you guys. So this is in this data piece is in the profile pages. And there's one for math and there's one for language arts.
Right.
And what I want to point out, because this is actually where we see some positive pieces for North Marion, this gap score, I'm going to read my writing here because it is complicated. What this is this, let me find it. Okay. So what they do is they determine the gap score for students. And the gap score is the score that is calculated based on what is my score and what is the score that it takes to be proficient and what is my gap between where I'm at and what it would be to be proficient on this assessment. That becomes then a gap score. And then what they do is determine, is our gap score getting smaller? Or is it getting bigger? If it's getting smaller, then our kids conceptually are getting closer to meeting proficiency. So let's say the cut score is 200 and I scored 150, my gap score would be 50. If the next time it's 200 and my gap score was 175, my gap score is now 25 and I'm getting closer. So they take the average of all the gaps from the students within a school and they say, how are you guys doing? Like how big is your gap? And then they also compare it. So for example, and this is actually from in the intermediate school as an example, we had in 2018-19 a gap score of 36. In 21-22, we had a gap score of 53. And so our change is now we're getting closer, we're at that 17. So we scored a level 3 on that because we are below that cut score of 19. So we're getting closer. We're getting even though that number is bigger, I'm like, how is that number figured out?
I think we're getting further away.
Yeah, that's what it would look like also. But the fact that it's a level 3 means it's good. So there's something, maybe it's because it's the negative 53.
No, because our gap has grown.
It looks like the scores.
No, they're minusing the 2. Change in the average. See, this is why I said it out loud. Now I'm wishing I didn't, but but it's just, you see,
It's good.
right. And so in the general sense though, what we are seeing is we have students where that gap is shrinking. And because it's shrinking, we are seeing growth. We're getting closer. Now, part of the issue we still have, as you can see from our scores, and we'll talk about this a little further, is we still have some kids that are very significantly away from meeting proficiency, but we are getting closer. And specifically, I won't point out the students with disabilities because we'll talk about that in a second, but we are seeing that gap is closing faster, especially with our economically disadvantaged students. So, and that's, just the intermediate school.
So are the gap scores being calculated by us or is that coming from the state?
That's all coming from the state.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions about that? I probably won't be able to answer them because obviously, I'm doing my best I can on that one. It was the one piece where it is kind of a new about calculation for the state. You can see obviously 2018-19 is the first scores they actually have on there. And so we're still kind of thinking how we can use it better. So I do want to point out a quick error that we caught and that was part of the reason why we delayed a little bit reporting out to you. So as I said, the report cards came out this fall And we discovered really quickly that there was a error on the report card for the intermediate school. And this is actually from the intermediate school, and you can see that error is that it reported that 93% of our students have a disability that they're experiencing. That is not accurate. It's about 17%. And so we reported it to ODE and we're like, hey, there was a mistake. We've got to get this fixed. And we were hoping they were going to say, yes, we will get this fixed. And instead they said, nope, our policy says we don't touch the report cards once they're official. And so we said, oh, okay. So what we have done, you can go to the next slide, Linda. We're going to see in a couple places. One is that front page where it says 93%. The next is obviously our students with disability, our scores there are incorrect because they're including pretty much all students in that category, right? We went from 17% to 93%. So basically our all students are now kind of the same as our students experiencing disability students. And so those passing rates are skewed in the SPED category.
Okay.
It's going to say, oh, look, which is why I said, like, I'm not going to talk about the gap score there because it said we earned a 5. We shrunk our gap. Well, it's because most of the students' scores within that are mainstream students who were shrinking their gap. So, you know, not the greatest thing to come into, but we are communicating about it. So on the next slide, this is our actual data. So we have about 17% of students at the intermediate school who are experiencing disabilities. About 87% of them are identified as regular attenders. Then their passing rate for English language arts is about 8%, and their passing rate for math is about 8%. So
Is that-
obviously,
Is the passing rate for them the same criteria as everybody else?
yes, yep. For this assessment, if they are identified as taking the extended assessment, which is different, then they're not calculated within these scores. So some additional information, we did report this information to ODE. We know where the error occurred. We found the report that it occurred with, but we are not exactly sure how it occurred. So it's possible, one of the explanations that ODE gave was literally just that a column got drug to the wrong spot and it replaced all the information because it basically went from a bunch of no's in that column to a bunch of yeses in that column. So we put some things in place to catch the issue in the future. And we have on the report cards that are published to the web, we have put a slash through that and there was a report, you know, indicating what happened from ODE. And then we have communication that's included with it so that our families know that there was a mistake. Unfortunately, the ODE website, like if you just go to ODE and click on this year and ask to download the report, it's going to be incorrect. And there's nothing we can do about that, unfortunately. So we did want to make sure it was public for you guys to know. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about just really quickly is as we dive into this data, we are really wanting to take a different look at data. And this is some things that we're talking about as a central office team. So the first thing is on the next slide, we are, this is coming from a book called Street Data by Shane Surfer. And in her book, she talks about there being 3 levels of data that we can look at. The first is satellite data, which is really can be collected to illuminate patterns within a system. The next is map data, where we're able to identify more specific issues that are happening at the school level, and they can identify both learning gaps as well as instructional gaps that might be happening. And then the last one is that street data, where we're starting to understand what is the experience that the student or the teacher is actually having in the classroom. So some of the question, like you asked, Crystal, around that layered demographic information, like that gets to street data, right? Us understanding, like, what does it mean to be this person experiencing school in this way? So when we look at today's data, on the next slide, we really want to think about it as satellite data. It's really far above the classroom in a lot of ways. It tells us a story, but it tells us an incomplete story, especially in terms of equity. It can illuminate trends that are happening, tell us where we have gaps, and it points us towards what a need might be. But it's like lagging, right? So we have a bunch of data right now from test scores, like we know what our third graders did, and all those third graders are now fourth graders. And so we can kind of point towards maybe where our third grade teachers need to address some issues, but it's not necessarily going to help us know what to do in fourth grade. That is where we get more into like map data. What is actually happening in the classroom right now? What are our current assessments telling us? It also can help us focus on a solution that lives outside the classroom sometimes. Often satellite data will kind of point us in directions that aren't really actionable for us. Because it's so high level, you know, we kind of can get into those like, well, what if? And so instead, we want to just kind of view it as that way. So our SBA scores, our trends in attendance, our graduation rates, they're really good information. We want to make sure that we pair that information with additional information that gives us a clearer picture. So here's our satellite data, our trends in satellite data that we want to kind of take a look at. The first is our chronic absenteeism, and you'll see here that we are pretty consistently in like the 30s across the board in terms of our absentee rate, with a bit of a higher trend at the primary and the intermediate school with 43.8. And
that gets back to like our hour ago conversation, 8 or more days in a 4-week period.
That's right. And actually with this number, the 4-week period is actually what the policy is about. This number is anything that pushes a student below 90%. And so 90% is a daily, monthly average that is continuing to change. So like, what's 90% right now? How many days would you have missed? Is actually not very many, if you think about it. Getting to 10%, I think it's like less than 1 or 2 days a month. And we know that for all the things you guys were talking about, that we have kids staying home for really good reasons. We want them to stay home if they're sick. We don't want them spreading the flu and COVID and whatnot. But we also know that there are other kind of trends that we might want to look at in terms of our attendance to figure out what are other potential root causes that we need to address, for sure. So, for example, we do see that students are still struggling to school. Illness is still our biggest impact, though. And then both Cheryl and I attended a conference a couple weeks ago through the WESD, and one of the speakers was talking about realities post-pandemic. And she said, what we don't have is a learning loss problem. We actually have an engagement problem in our schools. That if we can't get them back, if we can't get kids back in the classroom and reconnecting to learning, then that's where we're going to struggle. We can get them to close their gaps in math and reading, but not if they're not here. And so that piece is also a struggle. And I'm sure I can just say as a parent, like those pieces that came after the pandemic of how much easier it is to be like, I just don't go there. I'm just not going to go to school. It is a reality that a lot of our families are dealing with. I think along with that, we're hearing trends, and this is really a national problem of anxiety, mental health, et cetera, that are impacting kids as well, and kids feeling disconnected to school. So in terms of what we're doing to address those problems, as we talked about earlier, we have attendance teams. We're really working on high engagement strategies that how do we reconnect to kids? And all the work that we've been doing around culturally responsive teaching and becoming that warm demander is really connected to attendance. How do we create environments where students feel like I am such an important part of this class that it won't function if I don't come, so I need to be there. And it's a shift. It's like, what are the strategies? What are the right tools that we can use to reconnect with kids so they want to come? And then recognizing that illness will continue to impact our attendance rates. So then what are the supports that we need? Because if a kid has to be gone, and we want them to be gone so that they get healthy and they're not potentially making others sick, we have to have the right tools to help them make up gaps. whether it's knowing where I can find information, videos, resources, connecting to outside, like after school tutoring or different things. How do we help kids find their success? All right, next, this is just a quick snapshot of our overall district OSAT scores, the Oregon State Assessment System scores for ELA, math and science, and ELPA. And as you can see right now, we are between 65 and 80% of students who are not currently meeting benchmark in as measured by the OSAT.
Can you, I don't, I had a hard time understanding this. Right? Can you maybe describe
Yeah.
colors mean and how you're breaking those up?
Yes, so red stands for they scored an overall score of 1. Yellow is an overall score of 2. Green is an overall score of 3, and blue is an overall score of 4. To meet benchmark, you need a 3 or a 4. And so our red and yellow combined, when we're in that kind of adding those up, about 80% or more, that would be students who have not yet met that benchmark. And this is an average of all tested grades. So 3 through 11, except for in science where it's 5, 8, and 11. Can you go back to that?
So just so I'm clear, if we pull science out, 86% of our children are below grade level or below benchmark.
Yes.
What is meant by summative English proficiency for ELPA?
So that is the ELPA test. And so that, like with the ELPA, we're looking to score a 4 or 5 on ELPA. That one scored a little different. And so these are deceptive colors for ELPA, if you ask me, because ELPA is really something where we're growing them as English speakers. But basically our students in the red zone are going to be kids who are in that early intermediate, like 1s and 2s. So our newcomers, for example. The yellow zone is kind of those middle 3s and 4s where they're not scoring high enough yet to exit out of an ELD program, but they're making progress. And then our green scores are students who scored high enough to then be exited out of an ELD program and move into monitoring status.
Did these, and maybe it's in the additional files that you provided us, but do we have resolution into like at different building levels, or can we only see these district-wide sums?
We're going to go through English and math at each, or at like some major grade levels, but in a future report, I can bring you more disaggregated data and specific data around claims from the tests, so we can know where our exact gaps are.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't want you to do, I need to think about what I would ask.
Sure.
What we would ask.
But we can
for
access
you to
this
do,
online,
so I
right?
Don't.
ODE?
So you can access in the profile report, you'll get a more disaggregated look at this for every tested grade. This is a little more detailed than you'll get from the ODE, and it comes from the Willamette Educational School District data dashboard, is where those statistics are coming from and what we're going to look at next.
Okay. But those weren't like specific requests of.
Right.
Of there, okay. Okay.
So yeah, I think
the builders would be looking at that when they think about an improvement plan. What they're planning to respond to. So that info will be there.
well, and as an example, we use this data also for a number of different decisions. So for example, some of the initial steps we took with the math task force was to look at the math scores and then look at the claim scores in each of the math, so that we could see like, where do we see kids having trends in our gap areas. So I'll talk about it in a few slides, but in math, we know that math problem solving is actually where we see the biggest discrepancy, where not only are students not doing super well, but they're actually doing worse in that section than even compared to how they're doing in other sections. So we know that that is an area of need. We're going to specifically look for textbooks and curriculum that have good resources to address those needs. So that's ways that we use this data to help kind of point us in the right direction in terms of how to move forward. Are you ready? I'll move forward to the next one. So for one piece of data that we're also scored on, and this is in those profile reports, is our participation rates on the OSAT tests. We want to hit a target of 94.5 participation. And so we met participation for the intermediate school in all categories. At the middle school, we met in all categories except for white students and multiracial students. And in the high school, we did not meet in any categories. And basically that means kids opted out of the test and didn't take the test. And we knew that that was a definite thing that occurred last year. All right, so I will back up one and make one statement though. When we think about like we're looking at scores, recognizing who took the test and who didn't is going to be important, because what would scores look like if there were more scores added into our average, for example? So those are pieces of information we want to consider. All right. So next we're going to look at like some disaggregated data. And what I will say is that I specifically for this presentation, I'm focusing on a couple key areas. The first is third grade. We're looking at third grade data because third grade is one, it's that first year we're tested. Second, it really is it's kind of that pointing data that kind of points us to potential needs at the primary school, since it really is the biggest reflection of what had happened in kindergarten, first and second grade. Fifth grade, we look at because it's a first kind of major transition point. It's a good representation of what's been happening at the intermediate school, as well as it kind of lets us know how is this student going to potentially do in middle school. Are they going to be on track and be able to be successful? We look at eighth grade because again, it's that good representation of a big transition point. And if we have a student who is significantly behind, getting to high school where now I suddenly have to have those skills, because if I don't, I might struggle to pass a class and I'm not going to earn the credit I need to be able to graduate, is going to be a really key piece of information. And then finally 11th grade, one, because it's the one time that we test at the high school, and two, it's kind of our benchmark of, are we having kids leave here college and career ready? Do they have the skills they need? Now, I will add an additional caveat to all of those things of these are test scores from the OSAT, right? It's also like how we put weight on them and what meaning we assess them. You know, like I would not want to say, oh, a student who didn't pass the OSAT is not ready for college and career. It could just mean they didn't pass the OSAT. That's it. And that they have the skills they need, they just didn't have the skills at the moment to pass the OSAT. It could be, I'm not a good test taker, I was stressed out, I don't want to do this, so I'm just going to click. Last year as a high school principal, we had a student who managed to finish 3 tests in less than 2 hours, which is really a feat. Like, he must be a gamer, the amount of clicking he had to do quickly. I would not go to assess that test and say, this is how smart this student is, or what skills this student doesn't have. It's just, you know, a baseline. So we're going to use this data to tell us where should we point ourselves. Just like that satellite concept, we can tell a hurricane's coming, but I don't necessarily know if I should move my car, right? So that's the kind of, I want to give that caveat to this comment.
And to be clear, for instance, like in the high school, that taking the test doesn't, it's their graduation's not dependent on it. Their passing of a class is not dependent on it. Their GPA is not dependent on it. So the motivation is not real high. Sure.
Yep. Very true. It's and I will say, I always go back and forth. I've worked with a lot of people who are like, then we should make it worth a class. We should make it required for graduation. I'm like, I don't know if it's that, if like putting those high stakes on it is great either, like, it is what it is. And so we recognize that one of the things that these test scores might point us to is how do we give this value beyond we're making you do it, right? Whether that helps our participation rates, we don't have as many kids opting out, or maybe helps give it some potential data information. But you're right now telling them like, this will really help us have good data is not necessarily highly motivating for our high school students, so.
And it isn't even, it doesn't follow them into, you know, a secondary, you know, like graduate group.
Yeah, the most I could usually tell students is if they're going to a state school or Chemeketa, some colleges will use it to get you out of having to take the placement tests once you go to college.
Yeah.
So I have your OSAT scores, you don't have to sit through the Chemeketa math placement tests. And some of those, it's like, okay, that's a good enough reason to try pretty hard, because otherwise they will have to sit through yet another test once they start at Chemeketa. So, but even that's a fairly low threshold in terms of motivation, so. All right, so this is our district data for third grade. And you can see right now our percent proficient, so that is our students in that green and blue or 3s and 4s is at 28%. That's compared to 40% from the state. And then for 5th grade, and I'm going to just kind of go through this quickly, so stop me if you want to, but this is kind of breaking this down a little further. So for 5th grade, we're at 40% of students who are at proficient rate as compared to 47% from the state. And then from 8th grade, we drop back down to 31%. This is also, if I'll remind you, like where we also see a drop in participation at the 8th grade level or at the middle school level in general. So 31% as compared to 45%. And then at the 11th grade, we are at 37% compared to the state's 50%. I will say too, the high schools where we had the most opt-outs in general. So I think that this is possibly like an underrepresented number. Like there's something missing here, and I wouldn't base a lot of big decisions on this number. All right, next, what does this data tell us? Well, first, we're able to do some looking at the claim scores. So the test itself is made up of a variety of claims. They're testing certain kind of concepts. And across the board, when we look at 3rd through 11th grade, our biggest weakness is around writing and research, and that was across all levels. And so that's, like I said, where the state says your students scored poorly in this area and more poorly here than in other areas where their trend was. So that tells us a little something. We also are hearing from teachers those gaps in decoding and basic reading skills that exist. And we're seeing that there impacts K-12 with this information. So what we're doing, we have our new ELA curriculum that we're adopting and in every building. And I'm hearing really positive things about those materials, especially at the primary and intermediate school, where that foundation of reading is being built. So we're really excited about that. The MTSS systems at the primary and the intermediate school, so those multi-tiered systems of support, are really refocusing on identifying and supporting struggling readers. And in specific, the intermediate school is trying some new things where they're really focusing on making sure our struggling reading students, before there was a lot of intervention systems that were managed through different tiers and through with IAs, and now they're switching it up so that they have kind of our highest impact teachers doing those interventions. So we're excited to see the impacts of that. And then we're working on building instructional frameworks and common instructional strategies to help address these problems. All right, next for math. Again, we're gonna go quickly over this part. And for math, we see an even more troubling kind of trend downwards. So 26% of our students are meeting proficiency at the 3rd grade as compared to 40% for the state, 21% by 5th grade. And then for 8th grade, we're down to 13%. And then by 11th grade, we're at 17%. Now I will point out that this kind of downward slope is also, you'll notice the state numbers, like they started at 40% for 3rd grade, and by 11th grade, they too are at 22%. So we're following the trends, but we're just below that state line in general. So this is definitely a focus that we see across the state. So what it tells us, again, when we look at our claims, math problem solving, modeling, and data analysis are our weakest areas at all grade levels. And we have teachers reporting that students are just not very patient problem solvers. So they kind of want the formula and to plug it in, but they don't want to gather information and process it and figure out what the problem's trying to ask them to do. If you know the Smarter Balanced Assessment, that's a lot of what it does. It is not a math fact test. It is I'm going to give you lots of information and you figure out which of your skills you need to use to solve this problem. And so if we know that those are our weakest areas, we can be getting some of the computations correct, but we're struggling to know what numbers to computate in the first place. So what are we doing? Well, first we're doing the teacher development group training across the state, which is a district-wide initiative around math strategies for teachers. And we're hearing really good feedback from our staff around their experiences. We're also going through a math adoption that will specifically look for these type of things in our curriculum. So we're looking for curriculum that aligns to the strategic plan, making sure it's culturally responsive and really meets the needs of our student. We're looking for curriculum that aligns to our instructional plan, our instructional framework around the teacher development group work. And that instructional framework really focuses in on how do we teach kids how to talk and interact around math and have conversations about math. And then, like I said, teachers took time to identify student needs. And so we're looking for math curriculum that specifically has strengths in those areas of need. So for example, math problem solving. So, all right. Any questions on this? So the next thing I want to talk about just really quickly is our 9th grade on track and graduation rates. So this is actually one of my favorite ones that I found when I was doing my research and pulling data. So the red line is where the WESD is predicting our 9th grade on track rates. And so our 9th grade on track rates, I'll remind you, is by the end of their 9th grade year, they've met a quarter of their graduation requirements. And you can see where we were at in like 17, 18, we're about 90%. And then we saw this line go down. And so they said, well, last year, you guys were at about 50% of your 9th graders were on track at the end of the year. This is where your line will go. But you can see already where that star is. That's about where we're at right now. We're at 75% based on the first trimester's worth of grades. So we're already seeing a significant jump of on track. So I really think of that 50% as a blip. That is that post-COVID, how are we getting kids re-engaged? How do we get them passing classes when they've been able to just sit at home and do things at their own pace, et cetera. And we're seeing some really great work at the high school to address the 9th grade on track, including the summer school programs and different things they're doing. So I predict that that line is very inaccurate and that we're going to see it sloping upward. Next, what I want to point out too, with our blue dots, that's where we have specific population groups. So one is our underserved races, the next is our white students, and then the next is our Latino students. And you'll see that those blue and red dots in that where we're at currently are right up together. So not only are we seeing that jump in the 9th grade on track for our all students and our white students, but also our students who fall into those underserved or historically underserved categories. So we're seeing great trends upward. And in fact, actually, if we think about like our Latinx students, we're actually seeing a bigger jump in percentage for them than we are even for our all student categories. So lots of good resources being put into place at the high school to support students. Next, we'll look at on-time graduation, and we've been really steady with our graduation rates. We are at about an 80% across the board, and that's compared to an 81% at the state level. And we see that across the board with all of our different subgroups as well. And in fact, in the next slide, we can see that while we have a slight decrease around our underserved races and our Latino population, statistically, we're keeping pretty average across the board. So we're gonna continue to make those a focus. And I think the 9th grade on track, which is a really huge predictor of students graduating on time, the more we're putting effort into that, the better we'll see those trends continue to kind of shift. So what it tells us, like I said, we're seeing a lot of improvement with our 9th grade on track. Our graduation rates are remaining high. Our predicted trends don't seem to match what our current successes are. And it indicates that we're making, one thing I will point out, actually, I'm going to rephrase that. One thing that, and this was something that as a former principal was pointed out to me, when you have something like last year, where 50% of our students were off track, and then we're trying to get to 80% for graduating on time. What it means is resources, what resources we have to put towards closing that gap to get them caught up in their credits and different things is significant. So our goal is always, how do we put more effort in the 9th grade so that we don't have to catch them up? We just keep them on track the whole time. And so the high school is doing just that with their 9th grade success team work. They did a really great job with summer school this last year. We're also working with the middle school to talk about what are bridge programs, like how do we get that 9th grade transition to be a better focus. And that will continue through their how we support AVID at the middle school so that our students are ready for high school when they come across the street. So I want to take just a moment, because there's a lot of information, but just to talk about how all these things align to the strategic plan. And for me, this is really about identifying those, how do we point all of our arrows going the same direction to make sure we're on track. The first is all of these, making improvement in any of these areas are going to require us identifying those frameworks that kind of tell us how are we going to approach teaching and learning. What does it look like? How do we know it when we see it? And how do we get it to be consistent so that kids are having an equitable experience? It doesn't matter who their teacher is, they're having a great experience. And those culturally responsive teaching practices and creating a culture of belonging is really where that lives, which is embedded within our strategic plan. One of the questions we want to ask is what is getting in the way of learning, which it really goes back to that example of street data. Street data is how do we understand the user experience, which is really, again, embedded in culturally responsive teaching. It's how do we get to know our kids to understand what's getting in the way of their learning so that we can work to remove those barriers. Sometimes those are system barriers. We can do something and suddenly a whole group of kids have a gate removed. But sometimes there are also small moves of like, how can I get this kid what they need and this kid what they need? And I think for myself, part of the reason why it was easy to come back to North Marion is because we have the ability to do that. We are that like big enough to have resources, but small enough to be agile and remove small barriers that sometimes can be huge mountains in front of a kid. So understanding that is really embedded in culturally responsive teaching as well. It's how do we know kids, create a sense of belonging for them, and have a space where they know I can advocate for my needs and have that barrier removed. We're also building systems and tools for ongoing data collection and analysis. So those MTS systems at the intermediate school and primary school, looking at universal assessments. Right now, MAPS data is being collected, as well as FastBridge and iReady. So those are those more ground level, in the moment assessment information that we can gather. Our attendance teams, our PLCs, where they're doing kind of like school-based or classroom-based assessments and then comparing data with each other. Understanding how our systems impact our students so that culturally responsive problem solving, like how do we recognize when maybe, and you guys are, it's kind of like the fee structure we were talking about before, when we recognize that the solution for you doesn't have to be the same as the solution for you. And that is what equity is. And then building a culture of warm demanders where we can start to make sure that our students feel like their success is inevitable. We will make sure of it. So, all right. That is it. Are there any other questions for me? It's a lot of information. I feel like I've disappointed Linda. I promised her I would not be the person that keeps giving really long reports, but a lot of data.
I actually thoroughly appreciate all the data and your presentation and the presentation style that you bring.
Thank you.
So it's very thorough, which is why I have no questions, and I love to be able to dig into all of it. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Not only was that insightful, but it was also inspiring. Okay.
Nowhere to go but up.
All right.
All right, next do we have Mark or?
Mark is sick. He
Okay.
can't, he's barely here, but speaking 3 words and starts coughing. He did send the report, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at the table that he sent. And I said, all right, so what is your summary? And he sent me this. Our facilities are used a lot in the summer by not only our high school teams, but youth athletics in the community as well. Second, overall, our girls' programs use the facilities more than our boys' programs. Both have equal access. 3, looking through our facilities, our 2 bathrooms outside of the football fields need a complete facelift. I get a lot of positive feedback from visiting teams and schools about the quality of our facilities. Our bathrooms need to be improved because they are used all year long. 4, eventually, we need to start replacing lights on our fields, starting with the baseball team field, varsity field, because they are over 50 years old. And 5, my dream would be to get a turf field for our teams. Our soccer teams are always good and in the playoffs, but I don't like moving their games offsite to Canby or Wilsonville. It would be nice to host the games at North River and show off our great facilities. Thanks. So next month, they'll prepare a feast to look at the money that's invested in both the boys and girls, so you have an idea of what that is. And that's it for now.
Do you know, you probably don't know. I was just gonna ask if you know how that would be itemized. It would be similar to this
It
baseball,
might be, but yeah. it might be
sport
by-
specific, group specific.
Yeah, I don't know, I've never put that report together, so I'll consult with Mark and Deanne and with Linda, because she understands how those things are done. But we will present some.
Do we have a long-term facilities plan?
We do, and that's actually on an upcoming report I want to talk about. Right? Yes.
All right, moving on to number 9, we have a board action item to approve superintendent, it's actually 2-year contract, so if you guys got a chance to look at that. Is there any discussion or motion?
We can still have discussion, but I just wanted to thank Glenn. He's put in a lot of time, going back and forth between different entities on this, and I just appreciate his work. Let me say that.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
I don't have any comments.
Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the contract as presented.
A second.
Have a motion and a second. Is there discussion?
I would just say on the side thing that in the future, maybe it be discussed within before bargaining starts, and this isn't necessarily for Ginger, but in general, that our bargaining team would not have a financial benefit in the end of what was decided, such as in this COLA. It could give the illusion that there's a non-bias there.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. Bill?
Nay.
Richard?
Nay.
Crystal?
Can you call me last?
Christie?
Aye.
Heidi?
Aye.
Ricardo?
Nay.
Crystal?
Aye.
Chair votes for. That motion carries. I'm doing my math correct. Next item up is Superintendent District Report.
Okay, first thing on the agenda is principal reports. You asked about schedule for getting building level reports, so we wanted to plan it out in advance, so everyone knew what to expect. In January, the high school will give a report, or just the end of the in February, the middle school will give a report. In March, the intermediate school, and the primary will be in April. As far as the strategic planning progress as it sits in my desk, there are many things I keep my eye on, but one of them is ensuring that the administrators through the evaluation are not only referring to the strategic plan, but they're moving their own professional goals and student learning goals tied to the strategic plan. So that's what I've been doing, and focusing on cultural proficiency, their development of cultural proficiency, and their ability to recognize it and to set good expectations for that. So that's been happening. The next topic that I have to discuss is work session planning coming up. We need to start talking about budget and the integrated plan, and this will work in very nicely with the work that we're thinking about with fees and having conversations about that. Because not only will we be able to look at what we would hope to accomplish, but also what that would cost and where it would have to come from. So that will all be part of that conversation that can happen simultaneously. We will need to review the integrated plan that's being developed in February, and then in budget, we will need to review it one more time because we'll need to turn it in. It's due to ODE in March. And sometime between January and February, we can kick off a review of the long-term planning process. I would like to move by the summer forward on the repair of the baseball lighting field, and maybe look at other plans, start getting people together to talk about the fields, the current existing long-range plan for facilities that were not part of the bond, but kind of fell below the line.
and what those plans look like, at least start that conversation. It might take a year to move everything forward, but at least we can start putting plans together with people to add their ideas, maybe work with the Oregon Community Foundation, maybe there's other avenues of which we can approach. Having someone help us put a proposal together, I mean, there's all sorts of things to do. So we can start looking at that maybe late January into February. So those, I would like to bring those topics to our work session next year.
Yeah, I would just chime in and say, before I saw a baseball plan that I would be willing to vote on, I'd want to have the facility study and long-term plan clearly lined out.
Yes.
Does that lighting need to be rebid for us to have a conversation?
Probably.
Yeah, 'cause it's been
Oh, yeah.
a year.
Well,
at
they've
least,
done
right?
like that. They did the semi
Yeah.
repairs.
Yeah. That might be a good thing to, I don't know how long that process takes.
It'll take a while.
Yeah.
The facility will be, used pretty well from the spring through the summer. So
Mhm.
we'll have time.
Yeah. Okay.
And with that, I would like to invite Dr. Rose to come up and give an update on the strategic plan.
Everyone's going over crying out loud. Okay, it's time. And we're gonna bring Bill up here. But I'll try to keep this short because you have some materials that I provided for you in that document and try to give a little descriptor of the way that we've been working. And I know you can see now that we are keeping track, of student performance in those areas that we would expect those outcomes to appear in. What this document represents is how we're actually staying focused, and getting clearer and clearer on how the work we're doing to support our strategic plan, which was developed with a lot of thought, about trying to move those outcomes and move those indicators forward. How we're able to stay focused on that work and actually continue to make sense of how the work we're doing really actually represents the goals and the vision in the strategic plan, and actually leads to the indicators that we decided we would expect to see if we were doing it well. So let's see, there might need to be a refreshing of the Chromebook. There you go. And so now, Dan, you can, there's a link in the title up there in NMSD Strategic Plan Progress Report. That gets us to a little piece. I think it is important for us, and remember, one of the goals and one of the indicators in one of the goals was about how we're going to communicate, about our strategic plan. And thanks to a lot of work by Diane, and others, we now have a web page, that really, with our strategic plan and our summaries, and we have a lot of ways now to start to tell our story amongst ourselves and amongst our community, and make sure that, that we all get a chance to make sense of it and know how the work that we're doing and the engagement in the community is actually supporting that plan. We would like to have some pretty good evidence and understanding that the results that we get as we improve our outcomes for our students was because of the work that we were doing in our classrooms and in our schools and in our community to support students. And keep in mind that even though there are specific things that are happening to support mathematics and support language arts and support other aspects of our work in schools, that the notion behind the strategic plan is it actually takes all of those things working together, to cause those results. It won't be just one piece of the strategic plan that would lead to a particular result, even in mathematics, that there are so many things embedded that work together within that strategic plan that we need to do them all well. So keeping track of how we're making progress, towards doing those things in an integrated way
is other work that we're doing. What you'll see in presentations and increasingly in our community, oops, if you go back one, please. In our presentations, our visions, our pictures of when we think we see the work of the strategic plan and the spirit of the strategic plan in process and in progress. And what I won't do tonight, what I always love to do, is why I chose a particular photo, because there's always a story, behind it about how it represents some of the language on the page. And I encourage us all to do the same, to really start to be thinking about the context of the strategic plan. And when we see our work together, when we see us learning together like we were tonight, that's a mission that we're all striving for, learning together to cultivate lifelong growth. And that's for all of us in the district. And this vision about how an entire community is engaged, and so many stories about that we could tell, and photos that we could show, to provide equitable access and ultimately equitable outcomes for students towards their chosen paths. Again, is something really worthy to be looking for in the field. So in essence, some of you may know some of the stories behind these photos and some may not, but I'll just leave those, you're wondering in the future. You can go to the next one. Next slide. Oops, sorry, go back just one. So in essence, a lot of what this tracking and these conversations and this storytelling is doing is helping us to make sense of how the work we're doing at any given level, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in a school, or whether it's as a district group, how the work that we're doing is actually aligned ultimately to our planning is aligned to the strategic plan, or our goals that we're working on are aligned to those strategic goals and the vision and expectations of the board you've laid out for us. Okay, I heard Des talk about lining up the arrows, and that's exactly what we're talking about. So our goals, the three big goals, again, remember, each have three indicators behind them, and each indicator has some measures behind them. So our wondering is always, how are we doing towards those measures? Oops, go ahead, back to the first goal. So the first goal, are we finding evidence about the implementation of our language arts curriculum, the development of our math curriculum, and are we thinking about it through culturally responsive and relevant lenses? Second goal, around helping students develop confidence and competence with rigorous work. And that notion of, I'm not afraid to take on challenges and take on risks because I know I can develop this confidence and confidence in myself through my work and my practice. And where is evidence of that? Who else, who would play the violin and the piano with a giraffe, in front of them, in front of their friends and peers? That's, like I said, pretty brave students, if you ask me. And then how, in our third goal, how are we continuing to develop our systems around our ability to recruit and hire and retain staff, develop our staff in their cultural responsiveness and cultural responsive practices, in ways that reflect the cultures and the languages of our community. And so those are things that we're thinking about. We want to start to have those goals kind of just embedded in ourselves. So when we see particular work or particular practice going on in our schools, we have actually are making a connection to the strategic plan. I know I'm on target. I know I'm focused. I know I'm working on the right things. And so we have some processes in place to try to help ourselves, as a district, and help our principals continue to think through those things. And so what you have are access to what are some of the working documents and working plans, and some, as what I've called unscientific displays, of progress that I will own it, that I've just sort of determining we are based on conversations that I'm having regularly and systematically with our cabinet, who are also having, who are also out in the field, and with our principals as we think through their work together. So let's go back to the document if we could, Diane. Just the board memo. In that document, you have links to each of the buildings and the central office, what we're calling a tracking tool. It's an evidence gathering tool. So what we're really trying to make sure is that we have evidence, as we do our walkthroughs, as we visit each other, as principals are thinking about their work plans in their buildings, that we have evidence, of how we're supporting the strategic plan. And we've taken a quick glance at this before, but Diane, could you open up the high school tracking tool? And you can see that the tracking tool is organized by goal. So we scroll up. And by goal, by indicator, and then the measures. Those are the district measures that are being determined, even though each school developed their own theory of action about how they were going to move forward with their work to support the plan. These are the district measures and indicators for the plan. And so principals, either on their own or sometimes with their leadership teams, sometimes with me, just regularly and systematically talk through how we're making progress towards the indicators. And just really think it's an opportunity to think about how certain parts of our work plan actually align to a specific indicator and a measure that's in the strategic plan. So what we all have access to, this would be actually your backup, to your big data at the end. This would be your backup. So, and this is a process. This is part of the process. This is principles making strong connections, to the work of the strategic plan and the goals in the strategic plan, and being able to keep them, giving themselves permission to stay on focus, and not kind of go off in other places. You could at some point, you see it has the not started, in progress, and done type of an indicator, and that's just something they kind of use to think about where they are in their work. This wasn't designed to be to actually be a rating sheet at this point on something like that, but definitely captures a lot of evidence of the work and how it's aligned to the strategic plan. Questions about that tool?
I just have a quick question. I noticed in some of them, the font was blue versus the font was black. Is there a specific reason?
Yeah, that was one, that was Dave Sheldon's. And he just said, hey, before you come over and we talk through this, should I load some things up there in advance? And I said, sure, yeah, go ahead and do that. And maybe use a different, a different font, because we had already done one. So we were coming down to the second round. I said, yeah, maybe use a different color. And, then you can see, the progress since the last time that we met.
Oh, okay.
So
I was just curious.
yeah, exactly. Now there is a different answer on the other tool that we're using. So again, any questions on that? Does that make sense? It's our evidence gather, but it also forms the basis of these regular conversations that we're having, about the work and the kinds of things we might be looking for. So in essence, again, those theories of action at individual buildings were designed to improve the kinds of outcomes, that Des is reporting about today, ultimately. If you could then, let's take a look at maybe goal number 1, progress in the big, yeah. So this is where, I, in essence, have taken, for our process at other levels, when I look across the whole district at all parts of our district, I'm kind of looking at what's our general big, broad progress, towards a particular goal and indicator. And I tried to organize this a little bit. So oftentimes something wouldn't show up on this. It was just happening in one place, you know, but I'm looking for some of those things that have a broader district implementation to identify on this. And if you look, go back up to the top for just a moment. I did try to color code this a little bit. So the first indicator is black, second indicator is blue, and the third indicator is green. And I tried to identify those things in the as highlights down below. I tried to coordinate that with those colors. And so again, ultimately they all work together, but that's based on those tracking tools and where folks look. And the green on this is actually in fifth. So the green actually would indicate on that. If you could show my bar again, Diane. Would essence say, you know, probably in goal 1, there's clear evidence, you know, of about 40%, you know, of our indicators when we look across the district. You know, and there's some evidence, you know, of another 40%, you know, when I look across the district. And that in goal 1, there's probably about 20% that, you know, we really don't have as much evidence about. And that helps us kind of think about, you know, also kind of what are our next steps, you know, where are those gaps in implementation that we may need to think about as we move forward. And that can be a little different in different buildings as well. And that comes out from the other tracking tool. So in essence, and maybe if you could go to goal 2 on that, Diane. One thing this helps us give kind of a big picture. Goal 1, which is our English language arts and mathematics implementation and adoption. You know, we really, it's real clear how we're moving forward with that and the work that Des and principals are leading along those lines. In goal 2, you can see not quite as far along, you know, in terms of those things, but we know it's an important one, you know, as we move forward with support for our English learners, support for kind of a multilingual, multicultural learning community and the understanding warm demander in a way that we can support that. And also just with these notions of how, and that our folks are generally curious about, what are the strategies and measures, you know, that we would use to build growth mindset? How do we implement practices that build growth mindset that lead to persistence and perseverance in challenging problems and rigorous problems, and help me be more independent in my learning and not quite so dependent, you know, on someone else or my teacher. So those are the highlights of goal 2. And almost daily we can add to this. And then goal 3 is one that we have made the least progress on at this point. We know we need to continue to do some work on that. We definitely have evidence, you know, we have evidence around, and there's a little more coordination necessary about how with some of these recruiting, retention, and hiring practices, how do we coordinate between buildings, you know, and district level and our human resource department to really make that happen in a more productive and efficient and robust manner, I guess I would say. And there are, you know, there's an indicator at the end about an audit, you know, human resource audit and some of those things that still is yet to be done. And so that's why there's kind of a blank spot there in that piece. But we know we want to do it and we're anxious to do it. So again, this just keeps us on track and reminds us where we need to keep our eyes on the prize as we're doing the work together. So with that, I will stop. I just want you to know what's happening there and the process that's involved, you know, in implementing that strategic plan. And again, you'll continue to see those results. We know those results will improve. That was a very thoughtful, compelling strategic plan that was developed with that purpose. So thank you for giving me a few
Anybody
minutes.
have questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think that's all of our businesses before us. Is anything else? Anybody had to bring up? If not,
Oh, I wanted to bring up on the enrollment page, when we get the enrollment page, if I can have the count for admin and staff that we usually see with it.
okay, we can pass that one close along.
Okay, thanks.
And then, so thank you for those of you who who volunteered for that, January 19th, appreciate that. And then you and I can coordinate on when would be a good schedule to lay out for looking at fees. You know, to me, after the first of the year, but looking at that, so we can, you know, include that in the budget, so. Or go to a place where we might be able to make it figured into budgeting. So. All right, it is 8:58. I will gavel us down then. Thank you, everybody. Have a good break and time off.
Very good, you too.
Thank you.